Imagine walking into your favorite restaurant, ready to enjoy a peaceful meal, only to witness a full-blown showdown between a notorious perfectionist and the owner. What starts as a complaint about a napkin spirals into a community-wide battle, complete with protests, viral videos, and an unexpected twist that no one saw coming. This is the story of Karen, the HOA, and the restaurant that refused to back down. Buckle up, it's a wild ride. Before we dive into this unbelievable tale, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more jaw-dropping stories that'll keep you hooked from start to finish. Let's get into it. Karen, a 68-year-old blonde woman with a penchant for perfection, strode into the bustling downtown bistro, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room for any sign of imperfection. The restaurant, La Maison du Soleil, was a cozy French-inspired eatery with checkered tablecloths and flickering tea lights, beloved by locals for its rustic charm. Karen, however, was not there to admire the ambience. She had a reputation in the suburban enclave of Willowbrook for her relentless nitpicking, whether it was chastising neighbors for unkempt lawns or lecturing grocery clerks about expired coupons. Today, she'd arrived at the restaurant with her long-suffering husband, Gerald, who trailed behind her like a shadow, his face buried in a newspaper. Karen's target? A microscopic stain on her linen napkin, which she discovered moments after being seated. "This is unacceptable," she hissed, snapping her fingers at the server, a frazzled college student named Liam. Liam apologized and replaced the napkin, but Karen's indignation only grew. She demanded to speak to the owner, a soft-spoken French immigrant named Claude Dubois, who emerged from the kitchen wiping his hands on his apron. Claude, a man of patience honed by decades in the hospitality industry, greeted Karen with a polite smile. Karen, however, interpreted his calm demeanor as condescension. "Do you even inspect your linens?" she barked, thrusting the napkin at him. Claude assured her the issue would be addressed, but Karen escalated, accusing him of deliberate negligence and threatening to report him to the health department. Gerald sighed audibly, muttering, "Here we go again," as nearby diners glanced over, their meals forgotten. Karen's voice rose to a shrill crescendo, her accusations expanding to include the subpar wine selection and the atrocious placement of salt shakers. Claude, maintaining his composure, offered a complimentary dessert, but Karen refused, declaring the entire establishment a disgrace. By now, the confrontation had drawn the attention of the HOA's volunteer security patrol, dubbed HOA cops by residents, who monitored the downtown district for minor infractions. Two officers, retired veterans named Hank and Marjorie, hovered near the entrance, exchanging wary looks. Karen, spotting their uniforms, seized the opportunity. "Finally, someone with authority," she declared, marching toward them. Gerald slumped deeper into his chair, knowing this would spiral further. Claude, sensing disaster, attempted to defuse the situation, but Karen was already reciting a litany of grievances to Hank and Marjorie, demanding they shut down the restaurant for the safety of the community. The officers, trained to handle parking disputes and leash law violations, hesitated. Karen's theatrics reached a fever pitch as she theatrically clutched her chest, claiming the stress of the ordeal was triggering her hypertension. Marjorie, a no-nonsense former nurse, skeptically raised an eyebrow but radioed for backup. The restaurant fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the clink of silverware as diners awkwardly resumed their meals. Claude, his hands trembling slightly, retreated behind the counter, while Liam whispered to a coworker, "Is this real life?" Karen, now perched on a bar stool like a queen holding court, dictated her demands to Hank: a formal investigation, a public apology, and a permanent 50% discount for trauma compensation. Gerald, mortified, slid his credit card to Liam to preemptively cover their untouched meals. Outside, the evening sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the street as the HOA's patrol SUV pulled up, its flashing lights bathing the scene in red and blue. Karen's tirade at La Maison du Soleil was far from an isolated incident. In the quiet, meticulously manicured neighborhood of Willowbrook, Karen had become something of a legend, or perhaps a cautionary tale. Her reputation for stirring up drama was well documented, from her infamous feud with a mailman over a misplaced package to her weekly rants at the HOA meetings about unsightly garden gnomes. Her neighbors had learned to tread carefully around her, avoiding eye contact and keeping their hedges impeccably trimmed. Even the local grocery store had a protocol for handling Karen's visits. Extra staff on standby, a designated Karen aisle stocked with her preferred brands, and a manager ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. But tonight, Karen had set her sights on Claude Dubois and his restaurant, and she was not about to back down. As the HOA patrol officers Hank and Marjorie attempted to mediate, Karen launched into a detailed account of her grievances, each one more exaggerated than the last. "This isn't just about Napkin," she declared, her voice dripping with indignation. "This is about standards. This is about respect." She gestured wildly at the restaurant's decor, criticizing everything from the gaudy wall art to the offensive choice of background music. Claude, who had spent years cultivating the restaurant's cozy, eclectic vibe, looked on in dismay. "Madam," he began, his accent thickening under stress, "we strive to make every guest feel welcome. If there is a problem, we will fix it." But Karen was not interested in solutions. She wanted vindication. Hank, the more diplomatic of the two HOA officers, tried to reason with her. "Ma'am, perhaps we can resolve this without escalating further," he suggested, his tone calm but firm. Marjorie, meanwhile, was already scrolling through her tablet, reviewing the HOA's guidelines for handling public disturbances. Karen, sensing hesitation, pounced. "Are you suggesting I'm overreacting?" she demanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "Do you have any idea how much I pay in HOA fees? I expect action." Gerald, who had been silently nursing a glass of water, finally spoke up. "Karen, maybe we should just go home," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Karen shot him a withering glare. "Not until justice is served," she snapped. By now, the restaurant's other patrons were growing restless. A young couple in the corner exchanged exasperated glances, while a group of businessmen at the bar debated whether to intervene. Liam, the server, hovered nervously near the kitchen, clutching a tray of uneaten bread. Claude, desperate to regain control of the situation, offered Karen a full refund and a gift certificate for a future visit. But Karen was not appeased. "A gift certificate," she scoffed. "Do you think you can buy my silence? I'll have you know I have over 10,000 followers on social media. One post from me, and this place will be ruined." The mention of social media seemed to galvanize the HOA officers. Hank and Marjorie exchanged a worried glance. They knew all too well how quickly a viral post could spiral out of control, especially in a tight-knit community like Willowbrook. "Ma'am," Marjorie said, stepping forward, "let's take this outside. We don't want to disturb the other guests." Karen hesitated, clearly relishing the attention she was commanding, but eventually allowed herself to be escorted out. Gerald followed, his face a mask of resignation. As they stepped into the cool evening air, Karen continued her tirade, now directing her ire at the HOA officers. "This is exactly why I ran for the HOA board last year," she said, her voice carrying down the quiet street. "No one takes responsibility anymore. If I were in charge, this kind of incompetence wouldn't be tolerated." Hank and Marjorie exchanged another glance, this one tinged with amusement. Karen's brief stint on the HOA board was the stuff of local legend. She had resigned after just 3 months, following a heated argument with the landscaping committee over the color of mulch. Back inside the restaurant, Claude sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Liam approached cautiously, offering a glass of water. "Don't worry, boss," he said. "She's just Karen." Claude managed a weak smile. "In France, we have a saying, le client est roi. The customer is king. But this is something else." Outside, Karen's voice continued to echo, a relentless stream of complaints and demands. The HOA officers, realizing they were out of their depth, radioed for additional support. Within minutes, a second patrol SUV arrived, its lights casting an eerie glow over the scene. As the night wore on, the confrontation showed no signs of abating. Karen, now seated on a bench outside the restaurant, was drafting a scathing Yelp review on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen. Gerald sat beside her, staring into the distance, his expression a mixture of exhaustion and embarrassment. The HOA officers, meanwhile, debated their next move. "Do we call the actual police?" Marjorie asked, her tone uncertain. Hank shook his head. "Not yet. Let's see if we can de-escalate." But de-escalation seemed unlikely. Karen, emboldened by the growing crowd of onlookers, was now demanding a formal investigation into the restaurant's health violations. She even produced a magnifying glass from her purse, which she claimed she always carried for situations like this. Claude, watching from the window, felt a pang of despair. "This could ruin us," he murmured to Liam. The young servant nodded grimly. "Maybe we should call a lawyer," he suggested. As the clock ticked past 9 p.m., the situation reached a critical point. Karen, refusing to leave until her demands were met, announced her intention to stage a sit-in protest. "I'll stay here all night if I have to," she declared, crossing her arms defiantly. The HOA officers, realizing they were dealing with a force of nature, reluctantly called for backup. Within minutes, a third patrol SUV arrived, its lights adding to the surreal tableau. The night was far from over, and Karen showed no signs of relenting. As the HOA officers prepared to take more drastic measures, the restaurant's fate hung in the balance. Will Claude be able to salvage his reputation, or would Karen's crusade spell the end of La Maison du Soleil? The arrival of the third HOA patrol SUV marked a turning point in the escalating confrontation. The officers, now numbering 5, huddled together on the sidewalk, their faces illuminated by the flashing lights of their vehicles. Hank, the de facto leader of the group, outlined a plan to de-escalate the situation. "We need to get her out of here without making it worse," he said, his voice low but urgent. Marjorie, ever the pragmatist, suggested calling in a mediator from the HOA board. "Someone with authority," she said. "Maybe even the president." Hank nodded, pulling out his phone to make the call. Meanwhile, Karen remained seated on the bench, her magnifying glass now trained on a menu she had snatched from the restaurant. "Look at this," she exclaimed, holding it up for Gerald to see. "The font is completely illegible. How do they expect anyone to read this?" Gerald, who had long since stopped trying to reason with her, simply nodded along, his eyes glazed over. The growing crowd of onlookers, a mix of curious passers-by and disgruntled diners, watched in fascination, some filming the scene on their phones. Inside the restaurant, Claude was in crisis mode. He had gathered his staff in the kitchen, their faces a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. "This woman," he said, his voice trembling with frustration, "she is trying to destroy us. But we will not let her." Liam, ever the optimist, suggested reaching out to the local media. "If we tell our side of the story first, maybe we can control the narrative," he said. Claude considered this for a moment before shaking his head. "No," he said, "we will not stoop to her level. We will handle this with dignity." Instead, Claude decided to take a more proactive approach. He called his lawyer, a sharp-tongued woman named Evelyn who specialized in defamation cases. "I need your help," he said, explaining the situation in rapid-fire French. Evelyn listened intently before responding. "Send me everything," she said. "Photos, videos, witness statements. We'll build a case if we need to." Claude hung up, feeling a small measure of relief. Back outside, the HOA board president, a retired judge named Harold Whitaker, arrived on the scene. Harold was a tall, imposing figure with a reputation for fairness and no-nonsense authority. He approached Karen with a calm but firm demeanor. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, using her formal name in an attempt to diffuse the situation, "I understand you have some concerns. Let's discuss them in a more appropriate setting." Karen, however, was not easily swayed. "This is the appropriate setting," she retorted, gesturing to the restaurant. "This establishment is a blight on our community, and I will not rest until it's held accountable." Harold sighed, recognizing the futility of reasoning with her. "Very well," he said, "but I must insist that you cease disrupting the peace. If you continue, we will have no choice but to involve the actual police." The mention of the police seemed to give Karen pause, but only for a moment. "Go ahead," she challenged. "Call them. I'd love to see what they have to say about this travesty." Harold, realizing he was dealing with a lost cause, signaled to Hank and Marjorie. "Let's start documenting everything," he said. "Photos, videos, witness statements. We'll need them if this goes further." As the HOA officers began their documentation, Claude emerged from the restaurant, his lawyer Evelyn by his side. Evelyn, a formidable presence in a tailored suit, wasted no time in addressing the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying over the din, "this is a private establishment, and this woman," she pointed to Karen, "is engaging in harassment. We will be pursuing legal action if she does not cease and desist immediately." Karen, unfazed, stood up to face Evelyn. "Harassment," she sneered. I'm a concerned citizen exercising my rights. If you want to sue me, go ahead. I'll see you in court. The crowd, now thoroughly invested in the drama, murmured in anticipation. Gerald, sensing that things were about to spiral out of control, finally intervened. Karen, he said, his voice firmer than usual, that's enough. Let's go home. For a moment, it seemed as though Karen might listen. But then she turned to the crowd, her eyes blazing with righteous indignation. Do you see this? She shouted. This is what happens when you stand up for what's right. They try to silence you. But I won't be silenced. The crowd, divided in their sympathies, began to disperse, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others murmuring words of support for Karen. Harold, seeing an opportunity, stepped forward. Mrs. Thompson, he said, we've heard your concerns. We will investigate the matter thoroughly. But for now, I must ask you to leave. Karen, realizing she was outnumbered, finally relented. Fine, she said, gathering her purse and magnifying glass. But this isn't over. As Karen and Gerald walked away, the officers breathed a collective sigh of relief. Claude, however, remained tense. This is far from over, he said to Evelyn. She will come back. I know it. Evelyn nodded. We'll be ready, she said. The night ended with the restaurant closing early, its staff exhausted and demoralized. Claude, determined to rebuild, began drafting a statement to post on the restaurant's social media pages. We will not let one person destroy what we've built, he told his team. We will fight back with kindness and integrity. But as the lights of La Maison du Soleil dimmed, the shadow of Karen's crusade loomed large. The battle was far from over, and the next move was anyone's guess. The morning after the confrontation at La Maison du Soleil, the quiet town of Willowbrook was abuzz with gossip. Karen's dramatic standoff had become the talk of the town, with everyone from the barista at the local coffee shop to the cashier at the grocery store weighing in on the spectacle. Social media, as Karen had predicted, played a significant role in amplifying the drama. By 9 a.m., her scathing Yelp review had garnered hundreds of likes and comments, with some users rallying behind her and others defending the restaurant. The review, titled A Disgrace to Dining, was a masterclass in hyperbole, accusing Claude of everything from gross negligence to emotional abuse. Claude, meanwhile, was determined not to let Karen's campaign of destruction go unanswered. With Evelyn's guidance, he drafted a carefully worded response to the review, emphasizing the restaurant's commitment to quality and customer satisfaction. We regret that one guest had a negative experience, the statement read, but we stand by our values and the integrity of our establishment. The response, posted on the restaurant's Facebook page, quickly went viral, with many locals expressing their support for Claude and his team. Karen, however, was far from finished. Emboldened by the attention her review had garnered, she began plotting her next move. Over breakfast, a meticulously prepared omelet that Gerald had cooked in silence, she outlined her plan. I'm going to the HOA meeting tonight, she announced, her eyes gleaming with determination. I'll make sure everyone knows what's going on at that restaurant. Gerald, who had long since learned to pick his battles, simply nodded and refilled her coffee cup. The HOA meeting, held in the community center's fluorescent-lit multipurpose room, was typically a mundane affair, with discussions about lawn maintenance and parking regulations dominating the agenda. But tonight, the room was packed, with residents eager to witness the next chapter in the Karen saga. Harold Whitaker, the HOA president, called the meeting to order, his expression grim. Before we begin, he said, I'd like to address the incident that occurred last night. Karen, seated in the front row with a stack of printed documents, immediately raised her hand. I'd like to speak, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a knife. Harold hesitated, but eventually nodded. Go ahead, Mrs. Thompson, he said, bracing himself for what was to come. Karen stood, her posture rigid and her expression severe. Thank you, she said, addressing the room. As many of you know, I recently had the misfortune of dining at La Maison du Soleil. What I experienced, there was nothing short of appalling. She launched into a detailed recounting of her grievances, embellishing every detail for maximum impact. The stained napkin became a biohazard, the wine selection a crime against enophiles, and Claude's demeanor downright hostile. The room listened in stunned silence, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging skeptical glances. When Karen finally finished, Harold cleared his throat. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his tone measured. "We've received your complaint, and we'll be investigating the matter. In the meantime, I'd like to remind everyone that we must approach these issues with fairness and respect." But Karen wasn't done. "Respect," she echoed, her voice rising. "What about the respect this community deserves? What about the health and safety of our families? I demand that the HOA take immediate action to shut down this establishment." The room erupted into murmurs, with some residents voicing their support for Karen and others defending the restaurant. "I've eaten there dozens of times," one man called out. "Never had a problem." Another woman chimed in, "Karen's always causing trouble." "Maybe she's the problem." Harold, struggling to maintain order, banged his gavel. "Enough," he barked. "This is not a courtroom. We will handle this matter through the proper channels." He then turned to Karen. "Mrs. Thompson, we appreciate your concerns, but we must follow due process. Any further disruptions will not be tolerated." Karen, sensing that she was losing control of the narrative, decided to play her trump card. "Fine," she said, her tone icy. "But don't say I didn't warn you when someone gets sick or worse." With that, she gathered her papers and stormed out of the room, leaving a trail of stunned silence in her wake. Meanwhile, Claude was busy preparing for the restaurant's busiest night of the week. Determined to prove that La Maison du Soleil was more than capable of weathering the storm, he had organized a special community appreciation night, offering discounted meals and live music. The event was a resounding success, with the restaurant packed to capacity and the atmosphere buzzing with positivity. But as the night wore on, Claude couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's crusade was far from over. "She won't stop," he confided to Liam as they watched the crowd enjoy themselves. "She'll keep coming back until she gets what she wants." Liam, ever the optimist, tried to reassure him. "We've got the community on our side," he said. "That has to count for something." As the clock struck midnight, the restaurant's doors closed, and the staff began cleaning up. Claude, exhausted but hopeful, allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. "We'll get through this," he murmured to himself. "We have to." But in the shadows of Willowbrook, Karen was already plotting her next move. The battle for La Maison du Soleil was far from over, and the stakes were higher than ever. Karen's defeat at the HOA meeting only fueled her determination. She spent the next few days meticulously planning her next steps, her living room transformed into a war room filled with printed Yelp reviews, highlighted HOA bylaws, and a whiteboard mapping out her strategy. Gerald, who had long since given up trying to reason with her, retreated to his workshop, where he tinkered with model trains in blissful solitude. Karen's first move was to rally her allies. She reached out to a small but vocal group of like-minded residents who shared her disdain for anything that disrupted the perfection of Willowbrook. Among them was Margaret, a retired schoolteacher with a penchant for gossip, and Tom, a self-proclaimed community watchdog who carried a clipboard everywhere he went. Together, they formed the Willowbrook Integrity Committee, a self-appointed group dedicated to upholding standards in the neighborhood. Their first target was La Maison du Soleil. Armed with cameras and notebooks, they began surveilling the restaurant, documenting every perceived infraction. "A delivery truck parked slightly askew. Safety hazard," Karen declared, snapping a photo. "A patron's dog tied up outside. Health code violation," Tom noted, scribbling furiously. Margaret, meanwhile, took it upon herself to interview disgruntled customers, or more accurately, anyone who would listen to her leading questions. Claude, aware of the growing scrutiny, tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. He doubled down on quality control, personally inspecting every dish before it left the kitchen and ensuring the restaurant was spotless. But the constant pressure was taking its toll. "I feel like I'm under siege," he confided to Evelyn during one of their daily check-ins. Evelyn, ever the pragmatist, advised him to stay the course. "They're trying to provoke you," she said. "Don't give them the satisfaction." The community, however, was beginning to fracture. Karen's campaign had sparked a heated debate, with residents taking sides in what was now being called the Great Restaurant War. Social media became a battleground, with hashtags like #TeamKaren and #SaveLaMaison trending locally. The local newspaper, the Willowbrook Weekly, ran a front-page story titled "Dining Drama, a Community Divided," complete with quotes from both sides. At the next HOA meeting, tensions reached a boiling point. Karen, flanked by Margaret and Tom, presented a dossier of alleged violations at La Maison du Soleil. "This is not just about one restaurant," she declared, her voice trembling with faux emotion. "This is about the soul of our community. Do we want to be known as a town that tolerates mediocrity? Or do we want to uphold the standards that make Willowbrook special?" Her speech was met with a mix of applause and jeers. Harold, struggling to maintain order, called for a vote on whether to formally investigate the restaurant. The room erupted into chaos, with residents shouting over each other and tempers flaring. In the end, the vote was split down the middle, forcing Harold to cast the deciding vote. With a heavy sigh, he sided against an investigation, citing a lack of concrete evidence. Karen, furious, stormed out of the meeting, vowing to take matters into her own hands. "If the HOA won't act, I will," she muttered to Margaret and Tom as they left the building. Karen's next move was her most audacious yet. She organized a protest outside La Maison du Soleil, complete with handmade signs and a bullhorn. "Shut it down," she chanted, her voice echoing down the street. A small but dedicated group of supporters joined her, their signs bearing slogans like "Willowbrook deserves better" and "No more napkin nightmares." The protest drew widespread attention, with local news crews descending on the scene to capture the drama. Claude, watching from inside the restaurant, felt a sinking sense of despair. "This could ruin us," he said to Liam, who was busy fielding calls from concerned customers. But then something unexpected happened. A group of counter-protesters, led by a young mother named Sarah who had grown tired of Karen's antics, arrived to show their support for the restaurant. "We love La Maison du Soleil," they chanted, their signs reading, "Karen doesn't speak for us, and let them eat cake." The two groups faced off on the sidewalk, their chants growing louder and more heated. The situation quickly spiraled out of control. Karen, in a fit of rage, grabbed a sign from one of the counter-protesters and tore it in half. The young woman, shocked and angry, pushed Karen in retaliation. Karen stumbled backward, her heel catching on the curb, and fell to the ground with a dramatic cry. The crowd fell silent as Karen clutched her ankle, her face contorted in pain. "She pushed me," she wailed, pointing an accusatory finger at the young woman. The news cameras, sensing a story, zoomed in on the scene. But then something even more unexpected happened. A bystander's cell phone footage, which had been live-streamed to social media, revealed the truth. Karen had tripped over her own heel. The video went viral, and public opinion shifted almost overnight. Karen, once seen as a crusader for justice, was now the subject of ridicule. The fallout was swift. Karen's allies, embarrassed by the incident, quietly distanced themselves. The HOA, eager to put the matter to rest, issued a statement reaffirming their support for local businesses. And Claude, ever the gracious host, invited the community to a reconciliation dinner at the restaurant, where he personally thanked everyone for their support. Karen, humiliated and defeated, retreated to her home, where she spent the next few weeks licking her wounds. Gerald, ever the loyal husband, brought her tea and sandwiches, but even he couldn't hide his relief that the drama was over. As for La Maison du Soleil, the restaurant emerged stronger than ever. The community, united by their shared experience, rallied around Claude and his team, filling the restaurant night after night. And Karen, she became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of letting perfectionism and pride consume you. In the end, the Great Restaurant War brought Willowbrook closer together, proving that even in the face of conflict, kindness and community could prevail.